Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop platform, and going to talk about the map tools for tips and advice and kind of like an overview. So we're not going to build a bunch of maps, but we're going to show you some basic things and some intermediate stuff that you might need when you're going to use Fantasy Grounds. So I kind of have a list of things I want to go over. So brief overview of Fantasy Grounds. So the virtual tabletop platform is kind of important to kind of understand the importance of the map tools, the asset management, and those sort of things, and what you're actually trying to achieve during your games. If you buy content that's already in Fantasy Grounds store, so if you buy like an adventure, most of those already have maps built into them. So quite often when you buy a module or an adventure campaign setting, you'll have maps included, and those generally have the line of sight, the occluders, and the lighting and all that stuff figured out for you. And that's a lot easier to start with that than trying to create your own maps from scratch. So if you're new to Fantasy Grounds and you're kind of uncertain about the map tools, best way to learn is to use them and to play around with them when you're not in the middle of a game. But when you are preparing for a game, you should at least get a little bit familiar with how a map is set up. So I'm going to bring up the basic map pack that comes with Fantasy Grounds. This is free. They're nothing special, but they are kind of nostalgic. If you've used Fantasy Grounds since the classic days, these maps have been around, and you'll see them in various tutorials as you get familiar with Fantasy Grounds. So I'm going to go ahead and open up over here on the right. There's modules and asset pack. So I'm going to go to modules first, and then you can see right here I've enabled the 5e SRD, the SRD data, and the magic items. So I'm only using that to showcase some of the features. And over here on the left, I've dragged over some bandits and a bandit captain and a roper creature. So later on in the tutorial, I'll show you that works a little bit. And then there's a map pack in here called Fantasy Grounds Battle Maps. Very generic maps, kind of used in a lot of different tutorials. They've been around. So they're nothing special, but at least you have a starting point. So if you don't have a bunch of assets, let's just say you have a basic license and maybe the player's handbook or something like that, you can get by with that to kind of learn how to use the interface. And if these core rules come for free, so even if you don't have the adventure, at least you'll have these rules here. So the bestiary has some, like pretty much most of the monsters in the monster manual, just without the artwork. And then the SRD is kind of like a pared down version of the player's handbook. It just has the real basic raw rules as written type thing. And then you have the SRD magic items, which gives you some stuff from the Dungeon Master's Guide. The battle maps was kind of an earlier iteration of what came with Fantasy Grounds as the base program. So these are free, but essentially you got all these different, you got tunnels, you got these no grid things here, you got battle maps, indoors, outdoors. So I'm going to look at this, probably this Underdark tunnel one is just kind of a basic idea of where this stuff is. So when you load a campaign, and you come over here to the right under images, usually these will show up here in the images menu. And at that point, if you want to access a map that goes with your adventure, you have this group here where you can drop this down and filter. So if you have like 3 or 4 different modules or books open and you only want to see the stuff in that certain adventure, use that drop down filter to help navigate through this. Kind of narrows down the field there, so you don't have like 50 gazillion different entries. So I'm going to click on that. I didn't really need to do that because I only have this open, but nonetheless, that's where these are at. Generally speaking, they'll be titled and labeled with either a number or some kind of name that corresponds with something in your module. So if you've purchased like a Lost Mine of Phandelver or something like maybe one of your Pathfinder modules, they generally are tied in and linked with the story entry, or in some cases it is inside of the, or in most cases now, they're in the reference manual. You'll have the adventure, and then there'll be the pertinent links that go with the actual encounters or the section in the adventure. So this is basically how you access those, or if you, like I said, if you have it embedded in one of the adventure entries, that's another way to do it. So you can either come over here to images to kind of get an overview, or if you're going through the story itself, the adventure, you have a navigation button. You can go through the different pages, and then you'll see that where there's links, whether there be encounters, maps, or whatever. So that's depending on what you're running and such. So I'm going to bring up this Underdark tunnels as an example. So this is included for free inside of Fantasy Grounds. I don't really have a purpose for it yet other than to show how the map tools work. So one of the things is I'm going to close this modules window, and I'm going to move my notes, and I'm going to minimize this or take this and put it down in the hotkeys. So that's an important function in Fantasy Grounds to learn early. So the map tools thing here is basically a shortcut that I can drag and drop down to this toolbar on the bottom. So if I left click and drag and hold the left mouse key down, that will put that in the shortcut. So if I close it and I reopen it, it's going to come back. And just remember, every time you open a new window in Fantasy Grounds, it always starts in the center, like right smack dab in the middle. So if you open up something you've never opened before, it's going to be right in the center. However, when you move it, and then if you close it from wherever location you want to leave it at, when you go to do that again, it'll come up where you left it. So that's an important thing to learn about Fantasy Grounds as well, is as soon as you open a window and you close it, it's going to open where you last left it. And there is a new setting now in Fantasy Grounds, if you go into the options, that will allow you to do that. So there, it's called, it's in the first section here, per user. So it's not universal. This is per user. It says desktop restore windows on start. You're going to turn that on. So what that'll do is if you leave your session and you have a bunch of windows open, that will pop those back up when you start Fantasy Grounds again. So that's a little bit handy. There used to be an extension called Windows Saver. You don't really need that anymore. If you use this option, it will do that for you now. So this is kind of new. It's built into Fantasy Grounds. It's more of a convenience, quality of life thing. But you have to leave the windows open when you exit. If you don't, it's going to it'll keep this window state. So if I actually leave and I have all these things closed, that's how it's going to come back up. So you got to leave the maps up. So one thing about maps is you kind of have to have a section on your virtual tabletop to put your maps and have the room to look at them and such. So what I recommend is maybe this top right corner, maybe you're left-handed, you want it on the other side, and then you stretch the frame out to match wherever you want it to go. So this is kind of a square image. So I'm going to roughly make this square. And then to get to the extents of this actual image, you can unlock it, and you can either right-click it and go to View, and you can go to Zoom to Fit or Zoom to Fill, and that will fill the map. And you just zoom in and out with the mouse wheel. Now, if you don't have the center mouse wheel, or if you're using a Mac and you have the Magic Mouse with only 2 buttons, this is a little bit harder to do. But you can use this this little navigation bar down here. I don't recommend it, but it is a way that you can left click and drag, kind of move the map around. It's kind of hard to control, but if you do have a middle mouse button, you can click anywhere on the map that doesn't have a token or anything assigned and hold down the middle mouse button and just kind of drag it around to where you want it. Another way to recenter the map and to kind of get back to center is if you drop down this little toolbar up here next to the lock and you click on the zoom to fit. That's another way to zoom to get the map to recenter. So this is essentially just kind of like some basic navigation. So we covered, getting to the map, some settings, that sort of thing. Now, the one thing that as a game master that I found is it's very annoying if this map keeps moving on me based off of a turn. So in other words, I'm going to put the NPCs on the map, and then I'm going to go through the combat tracker, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So all of these guys are bad guys, essentially. So I'm going to take and drag the faction, which is this little shield or helmet, and I'm just going to drag and drop it down here on the map. And now I'm just going to disperse them where I want to put them. So this roper is actually the bad guy, if you want to say. And you can't drag objects on a map through walls. So if you need to do that, you hold down the shift key and you left click and drag, and then you can put these tokens wherever you want. Because what's happening is there's line of sight on there and you can't drag through walls. So as the game master, you can hold down shift, left click and drag, and put the tokens where you want them to go. So I'm going to go back to play mode because that's the mode you have to be in to access tokens. If I'm in this mode here, I can't move the tokens around. So you have to be in play mode. So I'm going to go ahead and move these bandits into position here. You see these two guys are stuck behind the wall. So I have to hold the shift key and drag them where I want them to go. So there's a bandit captain and his two lackeys. I'm going to change the roper to a kind of a neutral faction just so he's a different faction. And then I'm going to bring up the combat tracker to here. And I'm going to re-roll all of their initiatives just to have that out of the way. So menu, I mean, it automatically gives them initiatives because that's based on the settings in Fantasy Grounds. And I actually changed it to where these guys will roll individual, individual initiatives instead of a group. So I'm going to go ahead and hit initiative, and I'm just going to re-roll for everybody. There we go. So it's reshuffled now. So the bandit captain is going to go first. Now, the thing I was mentioning earlier is a setting in Fantasy Grounds on the back end under the settings. So one of the settings I recommend you consider or look at, and it's in the per user, is there's target remove on miss. That's something that you might want to do if you're going to use targeting. But the topic I'm going to be talking to you about is this auto center map. I have it turned off, but if it's on this setting or for on, what'll happen is when I advance the turn, it moves the map and tries to center on the token that's selected. Now that might be great for a player, but see, it shifted the whole map over to this particular location. So if I go back to here, I just backed it up. I just dragged this little thing on it, and it moves the map over there. So that may not work out for you as a game master. It might piss you off or kind of confuse you. So what I will do is recenter the map so I have an overview so I can see what's going on with the whole map. I might zoom in like maybe 1 or 2 clicks here or 1 roll of the mouse just to kind of get a little bit closer. And then I'll turn that off for me because I don't need that to move. I'll move the map when I need it to. So that's a feature that's already turned on automatically with the map tools. So if you like the feature, leave it on. If you don't, then you can move it. So the players may like that, but as the game master, I want to have more control over the map. I don't want it moving on me. I might have it zoomed into a certain area, and I want to keep it there until I want to move it. I don't want the combat tracker to move that for me. So by turning that off, now when I go down, it's not going to move the map at all. So it's important to kind of know about that ahead of time because it can be very annoying. So again, that's in per user, turn, auto center map. So that feature might be something that you want to use, but in some cases it might piss you off and readjust your map every time someone takes a turn. So it's up to you, but it would especially be annoying if you had a large battle map and you have it zoomed in like this. It's going to go way over to there and way over down there, and you'll have to keep zooming out and playing with it. So that's what kind of slows you down if when you're in the middle of a turn or in the middle of combat. So that's up to you as the GM, but that's a per user setting. So if you set that for your table, it's not going to affect your players. They have to set that if they want. And the other thing I told you about was the desktop restore windows on start. So that's a new feature that allows all the windows to pop up when you exit Fantasy Grounds and come back. So this is just a preliminary thing about the map tools and such. So that what I'm going to also kind of crack this open, and I'll show you what is underneath. So all right, now I'm in play mode. So that's this dice icon. This allows you to move things around. This allows you to turn on line of sight. And right now I have the player view on. So when I have a token selected as the GM, I can see through the vision of that token. So if I click on another one, these guys can't see anything because they're human, they don't have dark vision, and they don't have a light source. So that's normal. And I've seen a lot of people say, hey, how come my players can't see anything? It's likely that either the map is being blocked between your computer and theirs, or they don't have a light source. So that might be as simple as giving them a candle or some sort of light. So what I'm going to do is kind of emulate, let's say one of these guys, let's say the captain is going to light up a torch. He's concerned that perhaps it will attract enemies, but at the same time, they got to see where they're going. So he's going to tell his group, hey, I'm going to go ahead and crack open a torch. So in the Fantasy Grounds menu, if you come up here to the top right, there's an effects button. It looks like a guy with these little dots. It might look a little different in different rule sets, but essentially it's a button that has some of the basic effects for Fantasy Grounds. So if you don't have it on your character sheet or you don't see anywhere on the NPCs, you can drag this over to this particular individual. So we'll assume that he has at least one torch. So I'm going to grab the torch, drag and drop it onto this NPC. And as you can see over here, the light has now illuminated this area. So if I move the token around, that's going to also show you the line of sight. So that's a feature that you can do in the middle of the game. Players can do it as well. It's better if the players actually drag the lighting onto their own, because if the GM does it, then the players cannot remove it. So that removing it means you're going to go to the effects, and then you minus this out, and that will get rid of the lighting. So if I double click this, that's going to go dark. So I'm going to go ahead and now I'm going to give them a candle just so you can see the differences here. So this is a candle light. It's a lot less, so maybe I'll just leave it like that for now. And then this will give you an idea of the radius and the type of lighting you're going to get in this situation. Again, I'm in the player preview, so this is what it would look like from a player's view. From a GM standpoint, it would look like this. And it's kind of hard to tell where the line of sight starts and ends in some cases. So I tend to run this as the player mode on. That way I get a better idea. And if I need the overview, I can just hit Control P, which is a shortcut, and get an idea of where they are in relation to the rest of the map. So I kind of run it backwards. I'll run it with this preview mode only occasionally for an overview, but when I'm actually running the combat, I'll leave it in player preview mode so that I have a better idea of what the players are looking at during combat. So this is something that you'll have to get used to and decide what's useful for you. But essentially, I'm going to lock this and unlock it occasionally and turn on and off those options as needed. Another thing that might happen occasionally is the lighting might be disabled and the line of sight. So if that happens, then when your players are on the map and you've shared the map with them, they're basically going to see everything. There's not going to be any occluders or blocking or anything like that. So make sure those are on if you're making your own map or you download a map and add it. Sometimes people say, hey, this map doesn't work, it's screwed up. Well, you don't have it turned on. So those have to be on in order for these occluders on the back end to work. So all these red lines essentially are occluders that block light. And in this case, they also block movement. So these green ones are terrain, which doesn't really block the movement, but it does block light. So you could move through that, but it still blocks shadows and stuff. So there's different behavior for different occluders. And the reason I chose this map because it's not as complex. So the other thing to know is that these were done a long time ago. And I'm not sure what's going on over here, but I would totally fix that. You can do that by going to the selection tool, and you can actually take and you can move these points. Let's see if I can fix this. So you don't have to fix it, but now it makes that vertice, which is what I wanted. So to clean this up, what I would do is make sure I'm in the selection tool, single click, and hit delete, and that'll get rid of that little tail. And I don't need this top one up here for any reason, so I'll click or double click on it if necessary, and then hit delete. Oops, that was the wrong one. So I'm gonna have to single click and get rid of each one of those, and that gets rid of the segment. When I double click, that selected the whole line, so I didn't need to do that. So same thing with this one up here. This one's not necessary, so I'll single click and hit delete, and that gets rid of that extra line. So you might occasionally find that on older maps. These were probably done when line of sight was first set up. in Fantasy Grounds, so they're probably a lot cleaner now. Now see that they chose to not block these ends, but on the other end here they did. I don't know what happened, but it could have been that it transferred over and became a you know, the way it did. So if you want to get rid of a segment, it's like this is in the middle here. If you wanted to get rid of that, you draw a line. So I'm in the line tool and the wall tool. Just left click and then double click to create this vertice. And I'm going to do that over here too. So I'm just going to do it all at once. It's more effective to do it, to stay in one tool and then operate, you know, then go back and clean it up. So now I'm going to go back to the selection tool. And if you double click on any of these 3 points and hit delete, that's going to get rid of those tails. And then you single click on that point and that'll get rid of that segment. So you can kind of clean the map up occasionally if you have to. Most cases, this is not an issue. But every once in a while, you'll find one of these older maps that might be kind of goofy. So this is just kind of learning what the map tools do in regards to utilizing a map that's already made. I'm not going to go through a full tutorial on how to use maps as far as creating line of sight and all that, but I am going to show you some of the tools that you might employ if you have a map that's already created. Another problem that you'll see quite often with these older maps is they'll have way too many occluder points. So that's all these little dots. If you have a large dungeon map that has caverns, those are typically problematic in regards to memory and how much calculation it has to do. So on maps that are just square or have a lot more dungeon actual areas, those aren't as bad. You know, you might have 5 points or something like that. But on these, you got a gazillion. So after a year or so after the map tools were released, they started realizing performance issues. And a lot of these little dot things are not required anymore. You only need like maybe half this many. So to clean those up, or if you accidentally put too many on your map and you don't want to go and individually adjust them, there is a tool now that's built in that's been around for a couple years now. But if you go to the selection tool and you double click, that'll select all these points on this line. And there's a tool here called Simplify Selected Occluders. So if you click this little down arrow, it's going to get rid of some of those, which may help your performance in the long run. So if you're having a really sluggish map that's a big cavern, that'll help with that. Now you don't want to do it too many times because then you start losing the actual contour of the map. It'll take out too many points. So I'll do one over here, take out a few of those points. And then up here, I might do the same thing. So there's like way too many data points. So this is something that you normally don't have to worry about. But like I said, if you get an older adventure that was created before they discovered this issue, you might still have to do a little bit of maintenance on it if you're having issues. Most cases, you don't have to do this. So double click on there. I don't think I need to mess with it too much more. So I got rid of probably, I don't know, a quarter of the points, the data points. Most of these you don't really need to get your point across. And these are just kind of little tips that I'm showing you in case you run into that issue, because it is a problem, especially when newer people are using map tools. They might have a huge map, which is already problematic, and then they're going to put all these dots all over the place because you're trying to use it for the occluders, which is, you know, not a problem. You just don't need to do that many of them. So I want to go ahead and click on the roper here. So we cleaned up the map a little just in case, kind of showed you like what, you know, the basics of at least editing if you run into a problem like that. And now for the actual token. So when you select a token, that's when you're actually going to see the vision. So even if I change the combat tracker, it doesn't change the vision. So if right now, this is the bandit captain, so I have him clicked on, that's what I'm supposed to see. If I click the down arrow, it does switch to this bandit over here, but it doesn't switch the vision type. This is now, I clicked on it, now this is his vision of his boss, essentially. So if I click the down arrow, now it's going to the roper. So if I go over here, I can't see anything because I still have the captain selected. So I need to select the roper. So this is mostly a GM challenge or something that a game master will come up against. Players don't normally have to worry about it unless they're operating 2 characters. And that can get very complicated because if you have a character way over here and then you got another one way over here, you're going to lose sight and you won't be able to click on that character unless you select it. So that's the only caveat with players using more than one token or player, or they might have a companion animal or something like that. So if you're playing a druid, or perhaps you have a second player, you just have to remember to toggle between your character sheets, and you have to toggle between the vision type of each token. So as a GM, you always have to kind of worry about that. So every time you click, that's going to be the actual vision of that token, and that can be confusing if you got a lot of stuff going on the map. And like I said, the combat tracker does not shift the view of the token. So that's, I think, where some of the confusion might come in. So right now it's selected on the roper. If I hit the down arrow, yeah, sure, it's the bandit's turn, it's this one's turn, but I'm not actually looking through his vision, I'm looking through the roper. So I got to click on the roper to or the bandit to actually look to see what he's looking at. Now when I move this around, you see it kind of reacts to the light that his boss has available. So these are just some basic things that you'll learn as you're going through combat and exploration on a map. The other thing a player can do is use the arrow keys. So if they have the token selected, they can use the arrow keys to navigate through without having to drag. If your map is locked, players will have to they'll have to wait until you approve it in order for you to kind of emulate that type of movement as a game master. You have to hold the Alt key and then you drag the token. So if I want to move the roper, let's say I'm going to move him 20 feet or 15 feet. Once I hold down the Alt key and I start the movement, it'll create this little cursor thing, and these are waypoints. And then once I decide if I want to move that way, then I can improve it. So this would only be like if you're trying to really keep track of movement and you're being more strategic and tactical. But most GMs would just move it within a fair distance, maybe be off 1 square or something. But nonetheless, if you want to keep track of the movement, you can hold down the Alt key and hold Shift, and then you will approve the movement. So that's how you emulate the player lock token. So there's a section up here where you can also unlock it, and that allows players to move around freely without needing permission to move. So I do that occasionally when we're in exploration mode and it's a big open area and I don't care where they're going. Like there's no traps or encounters and they just want to kind of look around. I'll unlock it so I don't have to approve every little single movement. However, during combat, I'll keep it locked so I have a little bit more control on who's moving and that sort of thing. So it's kind of up to you, to your play style. There are some maps that are not as tactical. They're just an image and you're just kind of using it as a battlefield kind of thing. Those probably don't matter as much, but there again, it's up to you, like how you want to run your table. So let me go back to my notes. So down at the bottom here is a shortcut. So if I want to come back to this map easier, not only am I going to leave it open, but I'm going to left click and drag it and actually drop it down here on the toolbar. So if I accidentally close it, I can just quickly bring it back up. The other thing is if I exit Fantasy Grounds, since I changed the settings, it'll allow me to, it'll restore this image, because if I leave it up, it will do that. And that's based off this basic, this newer function called Desktop Restore Windows on Start. You have to turn that on. It's off by default. So, and then the Auto Center thing was the other thing where it will move the whole map when you advance the tracker. So I actually turn it off for me because I want to keep control of where the map is and how it's laid out. I don't want it to keep shifting on me. So the other thing is when you're done playing with the map, you want to make sure you're in play mode, and you can lock the map. That gets rid of the tools, and now you're kind of in play mode here. So this is kind of where you want to be when you're moving stuff around on the map, and it's working as accordingly, because now you have the line of sight going, And what you'll find a lot of times, though, is you'll run into walls, or players will try to cut through an area because they can't see the contour. So if you're making your own maps, or you're adding line of sight to an existing map, make sure you back off a little bit from the edge of the wall, because what you'll see is someone will try to go through this black part, and they won't realize that there's an actual barrier there because they can't see. There's no way to see the contour. So it's kind of good to back off a little bit from the edges so that you can get a better idea of what they're looking at. And one of the things that you'll have to do is hold down shift and move the characters out of choke points, because I'll kind of illustrate that. It's kind of annoying. It doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. So I'm going to come back over here to the captain. I'll turn it back to him as his turn. So what I'll see quite often is the players can't really see all the map, the contour of it. So if I claim this token, I don't have any light, I'm going to try to move wherever, and that's really going to be difficult for me to see where I'm going. So that's another thing that, if they don't have a light source and they're moving through a cramped area, they'll try to drag it through a wall, and you'll have to help them unfreeze it, because you'll get this cluster of people trying to get through a small area, and if they don't know where they're going, or they don't have any lighting, they're not going to be able to navigate. So this guy here has the light source, so they actually should be over here, but they don't know that. So they're kind of running into walls and all kinds of crap. So what happens here is, since that happened, this player might not be able to move it back. So I have to hold down the shift key and kind of move them out of there and guide them through. That way, you can continue the turn. So I'm going to emulate something like that. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key. I'm going to move this character, and then he's going to end his turn over here. So if that's not a problem, then I'll go ahead and approve it. But if it goes through a wall, it'll get stuck there, and then you'll have to go and fix it. So it can get a little frustrating at times, depending on what's going on the map, how the map is constructed, that sort of thing. So I'm going to go ahead and unlock the map. I'm going to turn off the line of sight momentarily, and I want to talk about this map here. So in this case, this isn't too bad. This spot isn't too bad because it's over 1 square. But if you have a map that's only half a square, here is getting close to that point, this little area right here is essentially just over a square. So when you're going to move through that area, you can get a choke point in here, which may or may not be good for your campaign. It might end up pissing you off, especially if it's in the middle of the map and you have to go through there a lot of times. If the players don't have adequate lighting and they can't see through here, that's going to be a problem. So if you're going to get maps or make your own, consider at least having this area 5 feet wide so that people can get through there. If it's less than that, they're going to get stuck, and you're going to have to move them through using the shift and drag key. And it resets their movement rate, so you might forget how much they've already moved, that sort of stuff. So it can get frustrating, but just keep that in mind. These little choke points can be problematic. So just make sure that you use the shift key and you drag the token out of that pocket or out of the mess that they're in and let them start over. Or if you know that they're going to intersect with something and they shouldn't be, in this case, this player may not see these stalagmites here. They might try to drag their token through. So what I would do is I'm going to hold down the Alt key. A player might do that, and they can move through there technically because it's not an occluder like a wall, but it is something they should be climbing up instead of going right through it. So if that's the case, I would just deny it and tell them, well, you can't go through there. You have to go around it. There are times where you have to kind of put your foot down and say, okay, you can't move through your allies without losing, some ground. So in other words, this fantasy grounds can't prevent that. So in some rule sets, you can't move through enemies, and in this case, for your allies, you're going to lose 10 feet. So if this bandit captain tries to cut through his player, he's supposed to only move about 20 feet. His base movement is 30. So if I hold down the Alt key and drag this over, technically I should be here on the other side of this, not up here. So I would I would deny that, and I'd only let him go to about here. That probably would be, you can move 20 feet. So I might let him move like that. But again, if you don't like the movement, you can deny it, or in this case, you can approve it. So you got to kind of use a gentleman's agreement on movement and navigation on the map. It's going to take a little bit for your players to get used to not tracing these things through the walls. They're going to have adequate light sources, and they're going to have to pay attention to the contour of the map itself, because when I turn these back on, there's really nothing you can see. I mean, it's really hard. Like this guy can see because he's got a candle. But the rest of them, they don't have a light source, so that would be a real pain in the butt for the GM to control that, or to try to help with that. So these are just sort of things you might stumble on initially with the map tools. So I'm going to bring up my notes here. So we kind of did an overview. So what we want to talk about is some of the features of the map tool. So again, I'm not going to make a whole new map, but I will kind of unlock this and show you what these things, what they're for. So over here in the toolbar, you'll notice that there's, when I unlock it, this yellow sidebar comes up. You have the play mode, which essentially is the mode that you're going to be in when you're combat and you're playing. The layers tool allows you to drag assets from your assets area, and we'll go over that in a little bit. But your assets are going to be like all your extras, your decorations. So we might add a couple decorations to kind of illustrate that. And then over here you have the paint tool. So if you want to paint objects, you can use brushes, you can change the colors, all kinds of things you can do with brushes. You can paint with a built-in brush, or you can bring in your own textures, or you can even paint with a symbol or another character if you want. But essentially you have the ability to paint on the map too. Effects one is where you're going to add the visual effects that are kind of universal, like clouds, rain, mist, that sort of thing. So that's where you would do that, and you can add an effects layer, and then you can turn that on, and then you can decide later if you want to mask it and only allow certain areas to see the effect. On the line of sight tool, this is where you set up these lines and occluders. So in there you have a wall tool, you have a terrain tool, which is like these green things. There's a door tool, so there's no door in here, so there's no need for that. There's a secret door tool. There is a window tool, an illusionary wall or a curtain, if you want to. It blocks light but not movement. You have a pit tool, so if you were going to make like a trap or some kind of lower elevation, you can do that. And then there's a shadow caster, which only works in outdoor maps, but essentially it reacts to the sun. So if you have an object that's outside and you want to at least just show the shadow for the light, so like the sun moves directions, or maybe it goes from dark to, or it goes from winter to fall, you can kind of emulate that with the shadow caster. But that only works on exterior objects that are in the ambient light outside. It doesn't work on indoor lighting unless you set it up that way. So then you have the lighting tool, and this is where you can actually select a light. You can add a light, such as a torch or something that's more permanent inside of a building. You have token light. So this is an important thing, I think, that gets missed quite a bit. So the token light allows you to assign a light to a token. So a token is actually something that you can interact with. It's actually on the play layer, not on the asset layer. So tokens sit on the very top. That's where your players and NPCs are. And then all the other layers are underneath, and only the GM can access those. So if you were going to ask, let's say you wanted to do a light spell, or maybe give someone a torch, and you want to move the torchlight. Let's say that this guy has a torch, he lights it, he drops it on the ground. Kind of hard to do that without having a token to represent and assigning light to it. So what I'm going to do is go into my assets. So in the assets folder, I bring that up, and I want to go to tokens. So it's not an image that I'm going to drag to the map and decorate the map with. It's an actual token. So if I go to tokens, I'm going to go to my data folder, which is where I have all my tokens stored. I'm going to type torch, because I know I have something. So this is going to be a token, not a map asset. So I'm going to left click and drag this down to the hotkeys. So now this is a torch that I can place on the map that can be used by players or myself to be moved around. So the reason I put it down there is I'm only going to drag it to the map when it's needed, and I just kind of have it off to the side, kind of a just in case thing. So let's just say during gameplay, this bandit captain is going to drop a torch on the ground to give everyone some light, but he doesn't want to carry the torch. So I'm going to drag the torch to the map. Right now it's just a token. If you click on it, you can see it's selected. But when it's selected like that, I can go into token lights, go to presets, and I'm going to go to torch, and I'm going to click on this little add light button. So now that I've done that, this item is going to have torch light on it. But in order to move it, I have to be on the level here. So this is just a torch with light on it now. You could do that with a light spell. So if you have a token that looks like a round circle, maybe it's gives you kind of like a really light radius. It could be anything, but just to kind of give you an idea that this is now an asset that a player can move and the GM can move. So let's say he drops that there. So he wanted to do that just so that his players, or his companions in this case, have light. So that would be a good use case. So if you're going to do like the light spell or throw a torch around, that'd be the way to do it. So again, you have to go into your assets, and then you have to go into your tokens and search through there and find something that's going to represent whatever the light source is. If you don't have any, you'll have to make your own or import some. But this is a torch that is being used as a token. Now the difference is if I go into, let's say, the map tools, let's say the layer tool. So now this actually is underneath this. And if I go into images, which is where all my assets are, and I go to torch, this is now just essentially a decoration. So this is the same torch, but it's in this folder. It's not in the tokens folder. So if I drag this to the map, it scales itself to the scale of the original image. So that's already too big. So I need to come back over here, make sure I have this asset and layer selected, and I'm going to go to 0.5, so 0.5. And that's going to change the size of it so it's not so herkin. And now I want to make sure I have it selected. Now I can move this around and place it. The problem with this for gameplay is that only the GM can move this around. I could assign a light to it, but it's not as convenient or useful as doing this. So this is more for like adding decor and decorations, but I totally could make this an asset that I can move around myself as only the GM. So with that token selected, and I go to lighting, I can actually assign a light to this, and it will make another light layer, but at least I'll be able to move it around. So let's change this. Instead of having this being a torch, I'm going to make it a fire pit. It's a little bit more useful than a torch, because I think a torch is better served in something that's a token that you can move around. In this case, this is going to be more stationary. Doesn't mean you can't move it, but it's less likely you need to move it. So I'm going to go ahead and select this layer, and I'm going to click the delete key, and that should get rid of this. Let's see, is it locked? No. So I'm going to go now, select it, hit this delete, and that gets rid of that asset. So I'm going to look for campfire instead. So this will be something I might use over and over, depending on where we are in the adventure. So I'm going to go to campfire and see if I have any assets. Now these are asset images for the map. They're not tokens. So this is the choices I have. So I'll probably use this little, this one that's already got a flame on it, just to represent the camp. And then what I'll do is I will drag this down to the hotkeys. So this way I don't have to look for it again, and it's there for me in case I need to use it. And then I'll look for some fire. So I'm going to go with the animated fire because that's an asset that you can purchase or import yourself for any of the animation that comes either with the Fantasy Grounds map tools, the map packs, or you can bring in your own. So I'm looking for the fire, animated campfire. So I just put animated. I probably should have put fire in there to narrow down the search. So here's some fire right here. So this is the animated fire. So I might use number 2. So I'm going to left click and drag that down to the hotkeys. So that way I don't have to deal with it. And then here's an embers one. Maybe I'll use that instead. I don't know. So it just depends, but I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at that. But there are other assets that you can import yourself if you want to do it. So here's like smoke right here. So I might use that as a way to kind of make this look kind of fancy. So now when I'm done with that, I'm going to go ahead and close that. Now your assets are going to be either stuff that you import into Fantasy Grounds, or you can subscribe to the Fantasy Grounds subscription. So that's like $50 a year, and it grows. Like every year they add 4 or 5 packs to it at least. So it grows in value. So even if you don't like buying more stuff like that, that $50 a year is definitely worth it overall. The only problem I could say is that finding the right asset at the right time might be a little bit difficult. So the search field is something that you'll have to get used to using in the asset. So that's one of the complaints that the community has. But you can get assets from the Fantasy Grounds 4s like tokens and those sort of things. Or you can get this art subscription, which is $4.99 monthly or $50 a year. I think it's definitely worth it because there's a lot of, or you can buy them outright individually. I think there's more value in this case to subscribe. A lot of people don't like subscriptions, but I think in the in the long term, it's a lot easier. But there are quite a few map packs out, and one thing you do have to do with map packs, since there isn't really a thumbnail of every single little map pack asset, you kind of have to get familiar with them and use them to understand what's in them. Unfortunately, there's really no good way to show everything that's in a map pack. So if I go back to Fantasy Grounds, and I'm going to go back to the assets, I mean, this narrows it down, but it's not really helpful if you don't know the name of the asset or you're not sure what you're looking for. So one thing to keep in mind is you have to have 3 characters or 3 letters. So I'm going to go FG, and then I'm going to put a space in there, and that will allow me to search. So you have to have 3 characters, whether it's a space or letters or whatever. And FG normally is the name of the folders that have all the assets. So FG space and then whatever it is. So I'm going to hit enter with this FG. And what it does is it will filter it to all of the different asset packs. Most of them are named FG. And then there's like cemetery, decorations. There's the art pack from 2019. So this is their naming convention. So FG, and then you put a space after it and hit enter. And that will narrow this down so you know what folders you have. And at this point, you really don't have a good way to preview this. So if you go, let's look at the coastal map pack. So you open this up, this only had water in it. But then their other ones might have, other assets that you're looking for. So that's the only confusion, I think, is managing assets can be a little bit different and difficult to do. But once you get used to what's in the map packs, kind of get used to the assets, how it works now, it's okay. It's a little clunky, but I think Fantasy Grounds has some plans to move with, changing that up so you can kind of have a preloaded list that you can make your own collections with. That would be very helpful. I know they've looked at it, so that's probably not a priority, but I know that eventually they'll have to do something about it. Because once this thing grows in scale and you add your own, it just becomes very unwieldy. So there isn't a real good way to handle that. So I want to go into, let's say, FG, and let's go with the art pack. Let's go with the Abyss maps. So here's effects, here's tiles. So this one has probably more than one asset in there. So it'd be nice if we had preview images of what's in each folder and all that, but there isn't anything like that. I tried to make an adventure module that kind of had something like that, so you can see what's in each thing with, without having to click on every single bag. But again, it's kind of a challenge with the way that the asset menu works, the search function, and how it's displayed. And just keep in mind, if you've got like 50 gazillion assets, Fantasy Grounds has to create a thumbnail for you to preview it in these bags. So my recommendation is, if you're going to bring in your own, make sure you name them. If you're going to be over like 20 of them or so, I'd make sure that you turn them into WebM or WebM format with the transparency. That way it cuts down on the file size. And just remember that Fantasy Grounds has to open these up individually and display them as thumbnails as you navigate through. So that can cause some lag. So just kind of keep that in mind. And if you're first time opening the asset window and you come in here and then you're going to go, start looking at these folders, it might take a few seconds because it has to go through the entire library and scan it before it opens. So that can slow things down too. So manage your assets accordingly. The ones that are made by Fantasy Grounds and Smiteworks are optimized for Fantasy Grounds. They're a certain size, they got a certain quality. Those tend to be a little bit less intensive on your system, depending on what it is. When you start bringing in these really high quality PNG files that have like hundreds of objects, that's when things start getting bogged down. So try to be a little bit more picky and choosy about which stuff you add into your campaign folder into Fantasy Grounds. So actually go through all of your PNG files, make your own little folders and collections. That way, when you put it in Fantasy Grounds, it's not too cumbersome. Because it gets to the point where you want to have all these options, but you're probably not going to use half of those anyways, or not even a 1%. So I found that out the hard way. I have way too many books open, maps are too big, way too many assets, all those things, they all add up. And eventually your system or your Fantasy Grounds session will come to a crawl if you overdo it. So there is a limit to how much memory Fantasy Grounds can handle. And that's more of a Fantasy or a Unity engine thing. That's not just Fantasy Grounds. It has to do with the engine that it's built on. There is a limit to everything, and eventually you'll come up against that wall if you have way too many assets or too many tokens or too many anything. Also, these maps, most people tend to bring in these huge maps, and that can be problematic too, because there is a dimensional limit which you can find on the Fantasy Grounds Atlassian. So there is a section that you can go to in Fantasy Grounds on the back end on their Atlassian website, and it gives you those numbers. So like 4K is the maximum. That's like 3840 by something in size. But if you go beyond that, you're probably going to have some quality issues, like lagging and things not quite responding and that sort of thing. And then it takes for a while to transfer to your players, and it can be real cumbersome. So you want to keep your map sizes down. To share an image like this one isn't bad. It's not too huge, and it is something that has been optimized for Fantasy Grounds. You'll notice that they're a little bit lower quality because of that reason. They want to keep the file size down so that it doesn't take forever to transfer from your computer to someone else's, and they have the dimensions to a certain size so that it doesn't go outside of that 2K or 4K boundary. I would say 2K is probably the highest you need to go. If you have to go any higher than that, I don't know exactly what you have going on, but maybe a regional map would be that big. But all these little battle maps, they are normally like pretty small. You want to keep that down if you can, if you're importing maps, or if you're finding maps and you want to use them. When you import them into Fantasy Grounds, just keep that in mind. You don't want them too gargantuan. You don't want too many complications that'll accumulate over time. As your campaign grows, those demands go up, so you have to learn how to unshare an image if you don't need it. So like for instance, to share this map, come up here on the top left corner, right click, and go to sharing, and then share record. And I'll probably do that before my players come on the table. If I plan on running this map for my next session, and I don't mind that they see it, I'll go ahead and share it ahead of time. So when they connect, it'll kind of download in the background and, kind of take less time. But if I'm doing this on the fly, it may delay a couple seconds. Sometimes when you share a map like that, the players won't see anything. They'll see an X or all black. So if that's the case, quite often if you close a map and reopen it, that sometimes will reset the view and it will allow the players to see it. So try that first if that ever happens to you. If that doesn't work, then what you can do is let's say this is my player. I can right click and delete the token off the map temporarily, and then I'll re-drag it over onto the map. Sometimes that fixes the issue, because once in a while the connection between the token, the map, and the player character sheet gets broken, or it gets corrupted or blocked or something. I don't know what causes that, but occasionally you might have to do that. Now, if that doesn't work, then it's likely that that specific player is having issues connecting with Fantasy Grounds through however means you're connecting. So it could mean that you need to unblock their firewall, you need to make an exception in their antivirus, or maybe they're using a VPN. Whatever the issue is, it's more than likely a network issue on their end. However, if all of your players are having that same issue, then it's likely on your end, maybe something is blocking your outbound data and it can't update Fantasy Grounds because it's being blocked. So it kind of depends on the situation, networking, the how new or how old your computer is. All those sort of things kind of come into play. But the main troubleshooting is to close the map, reopen it. That doesn't work, delete the token, and then add it back on. And if that doesn't work, then you're going to have to ask that player to disconnect from Fantasy Grounds, reconnect, see if that clears it. They can delete their cache or whatever, see if that helps, because it'll re-download the map at that point. Because sometimes their cache record gets corrupted. And if that doesn't work, then more than likely it's some sort of security or firewall or something that's blocking the data. So those are generally your tips on how to fix those issues. It usually happens to at least one player at some point. So you got people that are using VPNs for privacy. You have people that have more than one antivirus, and then you have the Windows firewall and God knows what else. The other thing that can happen is sometimes your internet service provider, such as Comcast is what I have, they have an advanced protection setting on the website that I had to go and disable. Once I did that, my players were able to connect. I didn't even know they put that on there. It was a new thing a few years ago. Once I figured that out, everything worked out. But one day when I was trying to run a game, no one could connect to my table. I was like, what the hell? And I was reinstalling Fantasy Grounds and all kinds of stuff. And then I found out that they had rolled out an advanced protection application on their end, which you have to go into your account on the website and disable it. They put that in place to help protect your account and to stop DDoS attacks where you got like 50 gazillion people trying to access your IP address. So there's things like that that will come up that'll piss you off, but those are generally the ways to troubleshoot them. And if nothing else, if you can't get that to work, you can always come on to the Fantasy Grounds forums and go to the House of Healing, because that's where you can complain about these kind of problems. And you want to give them the rule set. You want to give them your console. So your console is up here. You can actually go to the chat window, type /console, and hit enter, and it will bring up the console menu, and then you just hit compile logs, and that will bring up a dialog to save your log. And I usually just save it on the desktop, and then you can attach that log to your complaint and upload it to the Fantasy Grounds forums. So if you have a problem, you can post a new thread, and then you can put the title, the rule set, what's going on, and there's this little paper clip where you can actually upload files. And you could show a screenshot and then maybe show the console error. This way they can go through the log and see if there's anything going on with Fantasy Grounds. But most often it's a network problem or a user error. So that's probably about 70% of the issues that I've noticed over the years is it's usually because they don't have the map set up right, or they don't have a light source, or there's a little bit of corruption between the connection between the map and the combat tracker and the player, or sometimes your cache file gets corrupted on your computer and you have to go into Fantasy Grounds and delete your cache. So if I exited Fantasy Grounds, went into settings, I can go in the back end and delete my cache folder and then reconnect, and it will re-download all the assets. So maybe that will clear it. But generally speaking, those are some troubleshooting steps. And if you're a game master, you're going to come across that at least once. So that's just a way to kind of mitigate that a little. In most cases, those things will fix it. All right, so I'm going to bring back up my notes. Let's see what else we're talking about. So we didn't really go through how to use these products. Or how to use the actual, how to make the line of sight and that sort of thing. So I have videos like that. I have a series on YouTube that are just basic videos, and they're shorter, not going to be hours long. I do have videos that are hours long, but I have a series on our YouTube channel, which essentially gives you the real raw basics of editing. So if I come in here and go to our studio, and I'm going to go back to our content playlists, there is one that has a basic map tutorial, and it has a ton of like really short, like 5-10 minute videos, and those won't take very long to get through. Yeah, so I do one called Map Challenges, which is where I just take a map and kind of go through it and try to add the line of sight and stuff for practice, essentially. And it's hard for me to teach it if I don't know it. So I have to go through those once in a while to refresh my memory and to get kind of used to using the map tools. So yeah, so there's a playlist essentially that has map tools, and you can use that. So it's called the Fantasy Grounds Unity Map Tools 101. And this is a playlist that I can put this in the end of the video, but essentially this has like maybe 6 videos. Let's see, what is it? No, 8 videos, excuse me. That'll give you some ideas on how to use the tools. And it's broken down into, into steps. So one is the occluders, one's the masks, one is just kind of like an overview, one is like a interior wall occluders, one deals with tiles, and one is for doors and windows, one's for terrain tool, one's for grid. So these are just kind of like a smaller videos that you might want to look at if you want to do it in steps. Watching a 2-hour video on some of the ones I've done in the past may not be ideal for you. To be rambling on and on and on, it just gets kind of old. But anyway, so these are just the art packs that you can get off of the Fantasy Grounds official store, and these are optimized. If you watch Josh Watmough, who is a Smiteworks employee, he creates all these assets almost every Saturday religiously. He goes through all the new map packs, shows you the assets, shows you how to use them, does more artistic type things, and then he will put out a map pack later on after he gets enough stuff, and then they sell that too. But essentially these things he'll make like his own, like this vehicle. He'll build it, and then he'll export that as an image in Fantasy Grounds. That way he doesn't have to rebuild it, and this will become an asset that he's going to use in his other games. So you can build stuff and export it as a PNG file, like a transparency, like with no background, and then re-import it as a complete piece and do it like that. So also Fantasy Grounds does support third-party mapping tools now. This is kind of new. It's not really new, but it is fairly new. So if you're in the map tools, and let's say you're using Dungeon Alchemist or Dungeon Fog or one of the virtual tabletop related map tools. So if you're someone like that and you start a new image, so I'm actually going to close this. I'm going to go to images, and then I might make my own group. So I'm going to click on this edit list, click on the green plus button, which will add a new category, and I'm going to put imported maps. And I'm doing this just for some separation and organizational purposes, because whenever you make content in Fantasy Grounds, it's better to kind of separate out your stuff from the stuff that comes with the modules. You don't have to do this, but it helps. And now that I have imported maps, I'm just going to get out of the edit mode and then click that. So I don't have any maps to edit, but I'll show you the process. So down below here is an import tool. So once you do that, you can import files. And if you do this drop down, you'll notice this universal virtual tabletop. There's the DD2, I don't know if that's, then WebP, WebM, PNG, JPEG, there's the Dungeon Fog. So these are all different formats that those third-party map tools will export in. Now, how they translate into Fantasy Grounds is another story. Normally, most of the walls will be there. Sometimes the door and the lighting will be there, sometimes not. So it just depends on how the application was built and how much of that data from the maps that you're exporting translate into Fantasy Grounds, because not all the features are one for one. Like sometimes lighting and the wall definitions are not too bad, but then when you start getting into effects and all the other stuff, all that stuff doesn't necessarily import into Fantasy Grounds. So your mileage will vary when you import content into Fantasy Grounds, depending on the features that are available in an asset or map pack on their website as opposed to Fantasy Grounds. So I wouldn't count on animated maps to import. You might get the actual map and the walls, but you're not going to get all the animation. So those are things you got to consider when you're using third-party tools. If possible, I would just try to keep most of it in Fantasy Grounds and just use a static map and then use some of the assets to kind of embellish what's already there. So what I'm saying is, for instance, this Underdark tunnel, I've already added this torch here. I've added other things. I didn't finish the fireplace, so let's do that. So I'm going to add the fireplace to this map here. And remember, I drug those down here at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is go to the Layers tool, and I'm going to drag the animated, or just the basic campfire, and drag that and drop it up here. So it's a 2x2 square, so it's going to take up this area. So I think I'm going to make it 1.5. I think that's a little big for the fire pit. And that allows me to do that before I even place it. The other thing you can do is recolor it. You can rotate it. So I might rotate the image before I even place it. I'm going to stick it right here in these vertices, and there's where the item is. So now the campfire's there. It's its own layer. So I'm going to place more assets on top of it, but I want to make a folder first. So I'm going to say add folder, just single click on the text, and that'll allow me to rename it. So I'm just going to call this campfire, because that's all the stuff that's going to be part of this campfire. So this is going to be called campfire, and I'm going to drag that campfire icon into that folder. So that way it's kind of embedded into a collection instead of loose. Now I'm going to take the fire, which was an animated decoration. So there's smoke, there's the fire. So I'm going to take that and drag that into the assets. It's wow, that's 10 by 10. So I'm going to want that to be 1 by 1. And that's why I put it in this asset area up here under layers. That way I have more control. If I just drag it to the map, it's going to be like this huge thing. I don't want that. So I'm going to click in the center again. And there's the animated asset. If I don't like where it is, I can go to the selection tool, make sure I have it selected here on the layers, and just left click and drag. And you want to hold down the Alt key or the Shift key so that you can drag it. So see, it's doing it by square. So if you hold down Shift, or in this case, maybe Control, you don't, yeah, it's Control. You don't have to follow the snap to grid. Now I kind of have this asset here, and it's in this folder with this other thing. Now I'm going to do the smoke. So there's an animated smoke ring. So I'm going to drag and drop that. That's 30 by 16. That's huge. So I'm just going to go to like 1.5, and that represents squares. And then I'm going to go and turn the opacity down a little bit because I don't want it to be cover everything too much. And then I'll click here in the center. So yeah, so there's a little bit of smoke there. It's kind of hard to see it. So what I might have to do is turn back the opacity. So if I click on the smoke and then I go into the pointer, the selection tool, I can go back to this tint and turn it up a little bit more. And then I might want to change this to 2.5 or 2 instead, or maybe 3. 2.5, I think, is what I want to do. Yeah, so now it's a lot bigger. So you get the idea. So all of these now are part of the campfire in a folder. So I can lock this so that it doesn't get altered, or I can move this as a whole set now. So I can move this around. Now this doesn't help with the lighting part of it. So if I need to assign lighting, I need to do that now. So if I click on, open this up, I'm going to click on the actual campfire, the picture of the campfire, and then go into the lighting tool, and then go into the add lights, and then I'll use a drop down and probably use a torch. That's about the closest I'll get. And then I'll click on that and it will assign a light bulb. So this is going to actually have the functionality of lighting now. So not just the looks of it. We'll actually have lighting. So now when I go to play mode and I turn this stuff on, if I so there's the campfire. So now that's giving off light. Now if I, as the game master, if I unlock the map and I have this selected, I can move the entire map. If I'm in the layers mode, I can move this campfire wherever I want it to go. So that's helpful if you're going to build a campfire and you want to use it on the map. The only problem is that you cannot save this entire collection. So what you might do in this case, minus the settings and the graphics, is you can kind of make your own asset and then export it if it's complicated, and then use that as an asset so you don't have to rebuild it. But in this case, I have animation and I have, you know, lighting and stuff. You can't really export that, but you can export the asset. So if I made the fire pit and I put the fire in there and then I had like smoke that was just static, it wasn't a moving object, I could export that as an image by itself and then use that later on as an asset instead of going through this every time you want to make a fire pit. But nonetheless, you can't save these collections. I really wish you could, at least per campaign. So that'd be nice if I could save this folder and like drag it down here, and then every time I needed a fireplace, everything was there. But that's not the case. And if you go to a different campaign, you have to redo this. So it's a little bit inconvenient, but it is what it is. So it's not much I can do about that. But essentially, that's kind of what you can do with these maps, is you can add assets to them and make them a little better and not have to worry about, you know, getting a whole new map. So like this thing here, I probably get rid of this because I don't need it. So if I go into layers mode and go into this area, I don't remember where I put that thing at. Let's see. It's a part of the map, but I don't remember where I put it. I can't even click on it. How weird. Anyway, so this is just a kind of a way to, you know, to use. There we go. Okay, this was a torch on the play layer, so that worked fine. It was the other one I was looking for. Okay, so anyways, that's enough for now. I just wanted to show you some things to do with the map, what to expect. There are some heartaches, you know, like the asset management is kind of a pain in the butt. The fact that you cannot make a collection and save that so you can at least use it in the same campaign is kind of a pain in the butt. So if I had another map and I wanted to use this, I couldn't. I'd have to redo this. So that's why I put the assets down here at the bottom. So at least I have that as a starting point, so I don't have to re-look for them. But this is kind of an inconvenience. Hopefully they can fix this. But there is an extension on the Fantasy Grounds forums. I think it's called For the Love of Painting. And this was put out by Bayne. And what this does is it, For the Love of Painting, it's kind of like a way to make those collections I was telling you about. And I'll say Fantasy Grounds. This is an extension. I think it's free. Yeah, this is called the Joy of Painting is what it's called. And there's a video on how to use it. And then there is a Fantasy Grounds Forge entry. But essentially what it does is it makes a folder on the side, and you drag all your assets into it, and it'll store it in there. Instead of using the hotkeys below, it'll give you tokens on one tab, and then it gives you assets on another. So and it sits outside here, so you're not going down here, and you're not going inside the assets. You can do all your building and collecting ahead of time. The only thing is, I think Fantasy Grounds will do something like that in the future. But the only thing is, I don't like relying on extensions, because if it breaks, then you're kind of reliant on it, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. But nonetheless, the Joy of Painting is not really too hard on your system. So I think it works pretty good. But that's all I got for today. If you guys have any questions for me before I go, I'll hang out for a couple of minutes. But other than that, you guys enjoy your weekend, the rest of it, and hopefully you had a good New Year's and Christmas. And I think I'm going to be doing more ChatGPT videos in the future, but I thought I would do a map tools one, because I haven't done it in a while, and I think it's important that newer users especially, that they understand how to use the map tools. And I do classes like these occasionally, but I'm having a lot of attendance issues, like people won't show up, or they got something that comes up, or whatever the issue is. So I might just keep doing these as a video. Anyways, take care, folks. You have